The decision to place Prisoner 77 into Sector 9 was not made lightly. It was made spitefully. Ward and Dalgarath had exhausted every conventional measure. The human, a male of the species, captured during the border skirmish on Keldamara 4, listed in processing paperwork as Marcus Allen Webb, age 34, former logistics coordinator, had been in the facility for 11 months. In those 11 months, he had organized 3 hunger strikes, written 46 formal grievances, convinced 7 guards to seek employment elsewhere, and somehow gotten the cafeteria's nutrient paste reformulated. Not improved, reformulated. He had submitted flavor notes. The warden had tried isolation. The human had used the time to learn calligraphy and decorated his cell walls with what he called motivational typography. Guards reported it was unsettling how cheerful the words were. She had tried increased workload. He had optimized the labor schedule so thoroughly that output went up by 12%, and he had more free time than before. She had tried reducing his social privileges. He had simply made friends with the maintenance crew. Sector 9 was, by every institutional metric, a death sentence. It housed the 7 most dangerous entities the Kezhari Confederacy had ever incarcerated. Each one had been given its own wing. Each wing had its own warning system. The sector's official designation in the facility manual was printed in a color that did not have a name in most languages, a deep, bruised ultraviolet that the design team had chosen specifically because it made the reader feel, on some primal level, that they should leave the room. The creatures within were KX-1, a Varadi apex predator, 7 limbs, bioluminescent threat displays, had eaten its last 4 cellmates across 3 different facilities. KX-2, a Molthene hive fragment, part of a collective consciousness that had been legally sentenced to isolation after its parent hive destroyed a colony of 40,000. The fragment spent its days broadcasting low-frequency psychic distress signals that cause hallucinations in anyone within 50 meters. KX-3 through KX-5, 3 Grindathi warriors who had, between them, caused 4 facility-wide lockdowns before being placed in individual cells with magnetic suppression fields. They communicated through the walls using a percussive language that translated, roughly, as, "When we get out, you will regret everything." KX-6, unknown classification. The intake team had listed its species as unverified and its threat level as "please do not look directly at it." KX-7, a being referred to only as the patient. It had never moved. It had never made a sound. The behavioral team's leading theory was that it was waiting for something. Nobody wanted to find out what. Marcus Allen Webb was placed in the central hub of Sector 9 at 0600 hours on a Tuesday. He arrived carrying a plastic bin containing 1 change of clothes, a worn paperback novel, a deck of cards, a small notebook, 3 pens, confiscated, 2 returned after he explained they were for journaling, not weapons, a photograph, and what he described as my emergency snacks. The intake guard, Vethric, a 17-year veteran who had never once requested a transfer, filed his first transfer request that evening. When asked why, he wrote, "The human said good morning to me." He meant it. Incident log, Day 3. Surveillance noted that KX-1 had stopped its threat displays. This was unusual. KX-1 performed threat displays for an average of 14 hours per standard day. It was how it processed stress. The behavioral team had a whole paper on it. When the night cycle cameras were reviewed, the analysts found the cause. Webb had pulled his cot to the edge of his cell, the side that faced KX-1's containment, and was talking. Not loudly, not provocatively, just talking. The audio pickup was poor at that range, but the transcript team managed to reconstruct approximately 40 minutes of one-sided conversation. The subject matter included the paperback novel he was reading, a thriller, apparently quite good, something that had happened to his sister at her wedding, an opinion on the comparative merits of various card games, and a detailed explanation of how logistics chains worked on his home planet. KX-1 had pressed one of its 7 limbs against the transparent barrier, separating them. The behavioral team stared at the footage for a long time. "It's not a threat display," said junior analyst Pethrin. "No," said Vrethka. "It's not." They had no category for what it was. Incident log, day 7. Webb had gotten the cafeteria to send a second portion of nutrient paste. He had slid it under the barrier to KX1 side. The Verati apex predator, which had eaten 4 sapient beings across 3 facilities, had eaten the nutrient paste. The behavioral team convened an emergency meeting. 6 of the 8 attendees required calming medication before the meeting could begin. The remaining 2 were Vrethka, who had developed what her colleagues described as a concerning professional fascination, and Analyst Garath, who had started keeping a personal log. It's responding to social stimulus, Vrethka said. All beings respond to social stimulus, Garath said. KX-1 ate its last 4 cellmates. Yes. Its last cellmate was a Grethian enforcer. They're not prey animals. They're not small. Yes. And now it is eating nutrient paste that a human passed under a barrier. Yes. A long silence. What is he doing? Garath said specifically. Vrethka pulled up the footage. On screen, Webb was sitting cross-legged on his cot, reading his book, occasionally saying something without looking up. KX. One was arranged near the barrier in a posture the behavioral team had never documented. The threat display was completely absent. Its bioluminescence, which normally pulsed in aggressive reds and yellows, had shifted to something low and blue. According to our Verati database, Vrethka said that coloration indicates. She checked her notes. Contentment. Incident log, day 12. KX-2 had stopped broadcasting distress signals. The Molthine high fragment's psychic output had been a constant presence in Sector 9 since its arrival. A low, grinding frequency that caused night terrors in guards stationed anywhere near the sector and had resulted in 3 medical leaves in the past year alone. The overnight monitoring team had filed a dozen reports about it. One guard had described it as hearing the sound color makes when it's afraid of the dark. On day 12, it stopped. Analysts initially assumed equipment failure. Then they reviewed the footage. Webb had started talking to KX-2 on day 9. He couldn't see it. The Molthine cell had opaque barriers for containment reasons, but he talked toward it anyway. He had, apparently, figured out that the psychic distress was coming from the wall to his left and had simply started responding to it. You sound like you're having a rough time over there, the transcript read. I get that. I've had some rough times. You want to hear about my worst week? It involves a shipping container, a monsoon, and approximately 400 kilograms of improperly secured protein supplement. I've told it at parties. People think it's funny in retrospect. Most things are. He had talked, the footage showed, for 2 hours. He wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to pacify the creature. He was just talking, the way humans apparently talked when they were with someone who was struggling. Like the talking itself was the point. The distress signal had diminished, then faded, then stopped. From behind the opaque barrier, there was a sound. Faint. The analysts had to run it through 3 filters to isolate it. It was as far as their xenolinguistics team could determine the Molthine equivalent of a sigh of relief. Incident log, day 19. Webb had started running what the surveillance team called, in their informal notes, the games hour. Every evening, between the last meal cycle and lights down, he would sit in the center of his cell with his deck of cards and explain, loudly, clearly, with hand gestures, the rules of a card game. He never played against himself. He faced outward, toward the various containment barriers, and addressed the room as though he had an audience. On day 14, it had seemed like a coping mechanism, a way to fill time. By day 19, the analysts weren't sure anymore, because the Grandathi, KX-3, KX-4, and KX-5, who communicated through percussive wall tapping, had begun tapping responses at him. The xenolinguistics team worked through the night to translate. The tapping meant, "That rule is incorrect. You have described the turn order wrong." Webb had apparently corrected his description the following evening, because the next set of tapping translated as acceptable. The behavioral team added a new notation to the Sector 9 file. Subject appears to be conducting multi-species leisure activities through barrier. Effectiveness unclear. Behavioral impact significant. Warden Dalgarath, when briefed, stared at the report for a long time. "He's teaching them cards," she said. "Through a containment barrier," Vrethka said. He can't even see most of them. No, and they're learning. KX4 corrected his rule explanation on day 16 and day 18. KX3 has, we believe, started keeping score. Another long silence. Ow, the warden said. Is KX3 keeping score? Wall tapping. Different pattern for numbers. He invented a notation system. The warden put down the report. The Grindathi prisoner invented a number notation system, she said. To keep score in a card game, he is learning through a containment barrier from a human who is explaining it to a room of creatures he can mostly not see. Yes, warden. I need to go for a walk. Incident log. Day 31. KX6. The entity listed as unknown classification. Threat level, please do not look directly at it. Had begun leaving objects near the barrier. Small objects. Crystals, mostly, though the material was unidentified. They appeared to form slowly over the course of several days, accreting from the air or the floor or some substance the entity itself produced. Their composition was beyond the facility's analysis equipment. The behavioral team had initially flagged this as a potential threat. Unknown substances, unknown intent. Then they had reviewed the footage of Webb's reaction to the first one. He had looked at it for a moment, tilted his head, then said, clearly and genuinely, "That's beautiful. Did you make that?" "Thank you." He had placed it on the small shelf in his cell alongside the photograph and his novel. There are now 11 crystals on the shelf. KX6 had increased its production rate. Vrethka, writing her analysis, paused for a long time over the phrase she was about to type. Then she typed it anyway, because she was a scientist and the data was the data. KX6 appears to be producing GIFs. Incident log, day 60. Emergency Protocol 7 was triggered at 0340 hours by the overnight monitoring team. EP7 was the code for subject in Sector 9 is in distress. Prepare medical response. Alert Behavioral Division. Do not send guards in alone. The EP7 code had been used 3 times in the facility's history. Each previous use had preceded a fatality. The monitoring team's alert was prompted by a sound coming over the intercom. The sound was unmistakably the sound of something begging. Vrethka was the first senior analyst on site. She arrived at the monitoring station at 0347, still pulling on her uniform, and listened to the intercom feed. It took her 40 seconds to process what she was hearing. The begging was not coming from Webb. It was coming from KX1. The Varadi apex predator was pressed against its barrier. Bioluminescence, strobing in a pattern the translation system flagged as high distress, making a sound that the xenolinguistic system was rapidly attempting to decode. The other sounds in the sector were overlapping, the Grindathi hammering on their walls in agitation, KX2's distress signal rising again for the first time in weeks, KX6 doing something that registered on the thermal sensors as extreme emotional output. Even the patient had risen to its feet. "What happened?" Vrethka said. "What happened to the subject?" The monitoring officer pulled up the footage. "We don't know exactly." He received the standard message about his status review. He read it, and then, on the footage, Webb was sitting on his cot with his knees pulled to his chest. He was very still. He was looking at the photograph on his shelf. He was not hurt. He was not in physical danger. He was, as far as the behavioral team could determine, simply sad. The status review message had contained a denial. His appeal for early release, citing cooperation and good behavior, had been rejected. He hadn't made a sound. He had just sat with it, quietly, the way humans apparently sat with bad news. And every creature in Sector 9 had felt it. The translation system finally processed KX1's vocalizations. Vrethka read the output twice, requesting immediate staff intervention for hub occupant. The translation read, "Hub occupant is experiencing distress. This is not acceptable. Please assist him. We cannot reach him from here. Please, someone please help him." Below it, the Grindathi wall tapping had been decoded. "Who did this to him? Give US their name." Incident log. Day 61, supplemental. At 0615 hours, Marcus Allen Webb woke to find that KX6 had spent the night producing something new. It was not a crystal. It was a shape. curved, luminous, about the size of his hand. The xenolinguistics team spent 6 hours analyzing its structure before concluding that it was, in intent and form, the closest approximation their analysis tools could produce to a word in KX6S language. The word, as best they could translate it, meant, "You are not forgotten." Webb held it for a long time. Then he laughed, a short, wet sound, and said, "Thanks, guys. I'm all right. You promise I'm all right, Kropka." KX1's bioluminescence shifted back to blue. The patient sat down again. The Grindathi tapped a pattern the translation system hadn't seen before. It took 4 hours to decode. "We are keeping score," it said. "We will remember. That is how it is done." Supplemental note: Vrethka, Senior Analyst, Behavioral Division. I've been asked by the warden's office to provide a summary recommendation based on 61 days of observation. The original purpose of placing prisoner 77 in Sector 9 was disciplinary. It is my professional obligation to report that this purpose has not been achieved. The subject has not been broken. He has not been terrorized. He has not been harmed, physically or psychologically, in any way that our instruments can measure. He has, however, done something that I do not have a clean clinical framework for. In 61 days, without tools, without authority, without any mechanism of force or coercion, he appears to have become, and I recognize how this will read in a formal report, but I have checked my data 4 times, the emotional anchor of Sector 9. KX. 1 is calmer than at any point since intake. KX. 2 has not broadcast a distress signal in over 2 weeks. The Grindathi are communicating in a way that is not purely threatening for the first time in their incarceration. KX. 6 is producing art. KX. 7 has moved. 7 beings who are described in their respective intake reports as unmanageable, unrehabilitable, and in 2 cases not fully understood, have organized themselves, informally, around the well-being of one human. They are not afraid of him. They are not dominated by him. They are not even, as far as we can determine, fully aware of what they are doing. They are simply, and I'm going to use this word because no other word fits, fond of him. My recommendation is that prisoner 77 status review be reevaluated. I am attaching, as supporting documentation, translations of 47 separate instances of the sector's inhabitants expressing concern for his welfare. 2 instances of them requesting on his behalf that the cafeteria send better food. 1 instance of KX. 3 drafting what appears to be a formal letter of complaint about the quality of his mattress. And 1 instance of KX. 1. The Varadi apex predator that ate 4 of its previous cellmates, spending an entire night sitting at the barrier while the humans slept, in what our behavioral analysts have unanimously agreed to classify as keeping watch. We put him in there as a punishment. I no longer believe that is what it is.